Welcome back to Up West Sports. We got episode 9 coming your way. Got some pretty cool stuff to dive into. We're going to go over the 26-man roster as it stands right now, early in the spring, what it looks like. A lot of question marks, not a lot of statements. But either way, we're going to go ahead and deep dive into what we think the 26-man roster could look like a month from now. Ty, Kyle, we got some baseball stuff to talk about. Take it away.
Baseball stuff!
So this is kind of the roster breakdown I was able to do just really fast today. It just breaks down the starting pitcher. Ideal starters are in blue. Bench players are in yellow. Other guys in the 40-man are in gray. NRI guys don't have any highlight behind them. And then bench guys and guys on the 40-man that have options, you'll see like a 0, 02, 01. That's how many options they have remaining. So this is just kind of a quick breakdown. When you look at the final, I guess what I want to highlight the most is the final thing you look at there in the depth at on offense. Haniger and Garver are going to be on this roster almost no matter what, unless the Mariners just decide to say, hey, screw the $17 million we're paying to Haniger, cut him. And I just don't see that happening, or with Garver, the $12 million they're paying him. So those two roster spots are pretty much taken up. That leaves you with two roster spots for your depth of infield and outfield. I don't necessitate that it's Bliss and Canzone, but it's going to be a combination of Bliss, Canzone, Rivas, Rowdy Tellez, or a mix of guys. But the problem is you've only got those two roster spots to play with.
Yeah. And it really does come down to current needs and how can you make more room, right? And I think the first of the Mitches to go is probably Mitch Haniger, even though it's going to be harder to find him a home and try and eat some of his money than it would be Mitch Garver. I think it can be done. I keep hammering this one home, but a couple years ago, the Mariners actually, it was just the past offseason. The Mariners traded Marco Gonzalez, Evan White, and Jared Kelenic to the Braves. Well, the Braves turned right back around, I think, within a week and traded Evan White, shipped him off to the Angels, and Marco Gonzalez, over to Pittsburgh. Two kind of defective players, one of them coming off of a Tommy John. You don't know if he's going to come back at all. And they were able to eat $4 million of that. And they're not that far apart in age as to where, Mitch Haniger is. And also not that far removed from being like quality. So it kind of, I think there's a team out there. I know we talked about the Marlins being a potential fit and stuff like that. It sounds like, it looks like the Marlins are just going to bite the bullet and just kind of move forward without going over that threshold that I think the MLBPA is set at $105 or $100 million. It looks like they're just like, yeah, we're just not going to do it. We'll pay the consequences as they come. And the Rockies, I'm not sure if they're going to move past that as well. But that just kind of opens the door for other teams. Is there another team out there that's willing to take a chance on a grizzled vet that? I honestly think a good fit would be that of a Colorado Rockies, a team that's not really looking to compete, but could use somebody that they don't have to pay a whole lot. Maybe only paying them like $3 or $4 million. Even eating $3 or $4 million would help out the Mariners in this circumstance. But if he goes to Colorado, which is a hitter's dream, I mean, does well, that's let's say 250 and 12 home runs by the All-Star break. Well, now he turns right back around and he goes to a contender, like maybe the Brewers or maybe the Pirates take a handout on him or something like that. I could see a team like that taking a chance on him, and I think he kind of should maybe push the issue sooner rather than later, especially if he has a good spring. Yeah, Ty, I know you had some really good thoughts on this. How do they open up not just having two roster spots to choose? How do they get more?
That's a great question. I don't know how you get more out of this roster. This is my frustration early when as soon as I saw Kevin Newman sign with the Angels for his deal, really inexpensive deal, and you look at this infield the way it's set right now. The only guy you look at and say, okay, I'm pretty good with what I expect at his production right now is Luke Raley. Everyone else you're expecting bounce back or hoping to improve. Because let's face it, Dylan Moore, while it was Gold Glove utility production, it was pretty below average production with the bat. And Polanco, you're hoping he can have a healthy season where he can maybe go back to that 250, 260 hitter with, 15 to 20 bombs. How much better would have been, how much nicer would have been to be like, oh, let's go get Kevin Newman for $3 million. Now that their base position is just forgettable. You can put him over there and forget about him at the bottom of your lineup, right? Or Brendan Rodgers, right? When he got signed, like there are guys you could have filled this lineup with at the bottom of the lineup that would have extended the lineup and just made it slightly higher quality. And that's why when you're left with these issues of Haniger is going to be taking up a roster spot, you need better quality out of the bottom of your lineup.
Well, and Ty, to kind of touch on that point, I know we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I wanted to dig in because you had a really good point on this. What's the difference between getting a guy like Brendan Rodgers, getting a guy like Kevin Newman over the plethora of infielders that we already have in the system?
Well, it just gives you a guy that's already proven, right? You're looking for a guy that you could put out there, and he's not necessarily going to be an all-star every single time, but you know what you're going to get out of him. It's consistent production. It's 240, 235 hitting that you're going to get 690, 700 OPS right around there. It's league average, and you can forget about it, but it's not question marks. Right. When you got guys with question marks, you're left with this idea of like, well, now do I have to sit there and run Ryan Bliss out there as the backup where he's not going to get he's not getting consistent plate appearances. So is it better than to send him down to Tacoma? Well, then who's your backup? Right. Was it Sama Taylor? I don't think he's making the major league roster. Right. And then what happens if Dylan Moore has a sub 60 OPS plus at home again, right, to start the season? Are you now benching him? Who's getting the consistent AB at second base now, right? And when you got all these guys with question marks, you're actually sort of hamstringing the guys you would like to be able to potentially get at bats later in the year, like guys like Ryan Bliss, because you're now playing around, going, okay, he might be up the majors. Oh, now he's back in AAA. Oh, now he might be up in the majors. Now he's back in AAA, right? Whereas if you had an everyday guy like Kevin Newman, you could just stick out there, you forget about him. It gives you that 1 year where now Ryan Bliss gets to only play in AAA or only be a backup, and he's not having his chain yank like a yo-yo, and he gets a little bit more consistency out of it.
When you mentioned a really good part earlier, too, about the amount of kind of the 4A players, and I don't mean to belittle guys like Ryan Bliss or Samad Taylor. I think that they have a chance to be kind of good in the MLB, but as of current, they are kind of that 4A player at the moment. And so handcuffing them in AAA also hinders Cole Young, a couple of those other guys from getting everyday at bats in AAA who you need to develop, which you made a really good point on that earlier today. But I wanted to bring that out because that was a really good one, because the amount of infielders that you do have.
Oh, yeah, that's right. If you've got Samad Taylor taking up your starting position out there at second base or shortstop in AAA, and you've got Ryan Bliss down there, well, is that taking up bats away from Cole Young, or are you sending him back down to Arkansas where the hitting environment is pretty poor? I would prefer he be up in Tacoma, honestly, where the hitting environment is a lot better for him. Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't be a good idea to send him down to Everett at this point. That would seem like a demotion, but arguably the hitting environment would be better than Arkansas. So, you look at that and you say, if you got all these 4A guys and they're floating around in between Tacoma and the majors, how are you getting Cole Young consistent PA in Tacoma?
Yeah. Well, and to add to that, you have Austin Shenton, you have Leo Rivas, I believe there's a handful of other guys that are on that list that are all competing for the Ben Williamson. You'd like to see if he doesn't break camp with the boys. You want to see him get consistent at bats. I think that he's set to do, considering his age and how well he kind of ended AA last year. I would be very surprised if he wasn't at least in AAA. I think you should at least give him the Tacoma nod. Kyle, I wanted to hear your thoughts as well on those final two spots. Is there another way to open this up? Do you feel like you're comfortable with filling those last two spots? What's your thoughts on the current state of where the 26-man roster is?
So I think another thought to go with is, what if we just DFA'd him? What if we just DFA Haniger? I mean, you look at it, right? Like, we already owe him $16 million. It's Major League Baseball. It's guaranteed no matter what you do. And with that being said, if you're saying, hey, we have to have Haniger on the roster. Well, why? Well, we owe him $15 million. You owe him $15 million if he's on the roster or not. If there's a better player out there that we can put on the roster, why aren't the hell we doing it? So, and it's like, hey, Haniger, like, we're gonna put you on waivers. Hopefully you get picked up by somebody else. And if it sets up right, someone takes that contract. Now, again, they're probably not going to, but if someone's like, maybe calls them and is like, hey, we'd love to pick him up, but we don't want to take that salary. All right, let's make a quick deal. We go from there. But if it doesn't, then it's like, hey, send him along, or hey, would you take a AAA assignment? I mean, I don't think he wants to retire, but at the same time, it's like, hey, we got to make, again, to your point, we have these log jams, and there's no reason to log jam our youth. I think Ben Williamson has proven enough so far this offseason or this spring training. He should break camp. And he's a third baseman, second baseman, in which we have a second baseman who is a Gold Glove utility and a so-so bat, and we don't know what he's going to do in a full season. And we have a third baseman who's converting to second base with bad knees. I would say he's going to get a lot of opportunities to play either one of those spots. And then you look at like a Solano. Well, Solano can play either third or second. He can also DH. So then if you're having issues there, maybe you shift Solano to third. You put Williamson at second. Dylan Moore goes back to his Gold Glove natural position as a utility player. And you've got Garver as a DH. And then now you're sitting there, okay, now you got to fill out the other, now you're still filling out the other two positions, right? Is it Bliss? Is it Canzone? And I mean, I'm looking at the roster here and kind of the stats. I mean, Samad Taylor's played a pretty good brand of ball. Now, again, he's an outfielder. I think we have a large kind of log jam again of those individuals. But again, you could also, let's say one of them gets hurt, or if Robles starts off, kind of so. I would love to say, hey, would Rowdy take a AAA assignment and keep him close in the wings, move him up as needed? Here's your left-handed lefty bat. You put Rayleigh back in right field. I think Rayleigh's going to have a great year. I think he will have a statistically better year at first base, but I think he'll still be solid as a right fielder if Robles doesn't work out. But you've just seen a lot of other things. I mean, hell, Hogan Windish might be somebody else to think about too. I mean, he has done great things.
Yeah.
Nick Dunn is another great one. I mean, the fact that 3 out of our 4 best averages this year in spring training are catchers, and none of them are Cal Raleigh. So, I mean, then you add in, is Harry Ford ready to take that lead? And then you lead into it. Is Harry Ford at a point where, hey, I'd rather see him at the major league level, and now we're looking at Mitch Garver and Mitch Haniger as saying, hey, how do we offload these guys, or how do we just say kumbaya and bring up players that will help us now and in the future? Yeah, I know you lose some value in that veteran mentorship, but at what point do you go, what's better, talent or veteran mentorship? But again, that veteran mentorship words, one of them is maybe playing the playoffs a little bit. The other one was a part of a World Series team, but I think he was more of a, he was a color commentator behind the color commentator. Is that much value in that? It's not Justin Turner. This is Justin Turner. You're not getting rid of him, right? And there's another guy we could have added for $6 million, but that's a whole other side note for third base. So to me, there's a couple items there. One, could you just say, you know what, we're just going to cut this, move on with these 2 high dollar people. We have to pay them one or the other, but we have better talent behind them regardless of pay. play your talent. That's the thing about baseball is it's not like crap. I got to keep him because I'm in a salary cap and this and that. There's no salary cap in baseball. So either you're going to pay them and play them, or you're going to pay them and cut them and have your better players come in and we move forward. And so there's a couple things within that. So I'll wrap up with this. I like Bliss. I think Williamson should make the team. I think he's versatile. He also fits that mold with kind of Bliss. I don't think Canzone. I'm not confident in his bat. I'm not confident in his play. I'd rather see, I just think there's somebody else in the wing, somebody younger. Now, again, you don't want them to just sit there on the bench, but I think if you're going to keep those other three, Haniger, Garver, Bliss, give me Williamson as the fourth and call it a day.
Yeah, and
Kyle,
Ty,
I got a question real quick.
Yeah,
Is it better for Ben Williamson's development to come up and hope he gets plate appearances sporadically, probably early on, right? And then maybe if he establishes himself a little bit better, more consistent PA a little bit later into the season, where he's hanging out with everyday major leaguers, he's up doing the major league stuff every single day? Or is it better that he's in AAA getting 4 at-bats every single game?
So a couple ways to think about it too, or within that is, I don't know how healthy Polanco is. They say his knee's better, but I don't know if it's better. So it's kind of one of those. I'd rather have a guy that I know can play a really good brand of third base and can play a good brand of second base and has shown he can hit the pitching. And I'd rather have him sitting right next to me on the bench than wondering, well, do I need to pull this guy up and play that whole game? I'd rather have him just start now. And then you can look at, let's say the first month of the season goes by. Polanco looks healthy as can be. Dylan looks sufficient. All right, dude, we're going to move you down now. But we had you ready to go just in case. You've gotten the experience. You've kind of seen what the show is like. Now go down, work on your craft, and we'll see what happens. But I think you start him at the ball club just because you don't know how Polanco's going to deal with that. You also don't know how Haniger's going to deal with being an everyday guy and the fact that he's going into day one as an everyday guy. So, yeah, and having that young youth behind you, seeing it in some of the college landscape today, some of the teams that I've watched, competition brings out the best in people, or it's going to bring out the worst in people. So having that young guy sitting there ready to roll, chomping at the bit to get in, you better play or you're going to get benched for somebody else. And so it sends a message to some of these veterans, like, you are replaceable. Everybody is replaceable. So you need to play at the top of your game.
Yeah, I had something to kind of add to that. I think both you guys, Ty, the question was awesome because there are so many guys to kind of choose from as far as who's going to back up who's going to have that first crack at it. I think an important question or an important kind of statement to also put in there is, does Ben Williamson, sorry, I have a former player named Austin Williamson. Does Ben Williamson need to break camp, or can he spend the first couple weeks playing every day consistently in AAA? Because AAA actually starts, I think, a day or two behind Major League Baseball nowadays. It's no longer a week behind. Mm-hmm. So if he stays there and you give a guy like Austin Shenton, who has that 4A experience, Samad Taylor, Ryan Bliss, if you give those guys the first crack at it, right? And after that first week, you start to see where the chips fall. Maybe Jorge Polanco's not like you had mentioned. Maybe Jorge Polanco's not exactly where we wanted him to be. Maybe his knees are a little bit shot. Donovan Solano, we find out he can't hit in Seattle, which is not weird. And at 37 years old, I don't blame the guy. But also maybe there's some of those question marks that get answered.
He's next AJ Pollock.
As much as at least he was $9 million or whatever AJ Pollock was. He's only 3.5 plus incentives. But after the first couple weeks, maybe you get a couple more questions answered, and that's when you can bring Ben Williamson up after he's played every day and you've kind of figured out your top a little bit. So I think there's a little bit of truth to what both of you guys said, in the fact that early, within the first month, before April is over, I think Ben Williamson should be with the big boys. And I think if you're not seeing success from Polanco, if you're not seeing success from Dylan Moore, and you're not seeing success from Donovan Solano, I think it's super easy for him to just be slated as an everyday starter and then him lose the job to a Ryan Bliss, or maybe Ryan Bliss gets that opportunity and Williamson gets the opportunity. But yeah, I'd like to see where things shake out with the guys that are supposed to produce first, and then make the change over there. Curious, what do you guys take on that?
Kyle, Gavin, riddle me this: excluding Andres Munoz, who do you have more? What unit do you have more confident in being major league average, the infield or the bullpen?
Bullpen. I mean,
I don't think it's even close, right?
I mean, you have a third baseman, you have a second baseman, you converted to third base with shaky knees, and you've got Dylan Moore, who again, he's a Gold Glove utility guy, but is his game really about, playing a couple spots here, a couple innings here, a couple innings there? Now it's all he's doing. Like, it's kind of that additional.
So it begs a question. When's the World Series window of this team? It's basically between now and what, about 2027, right? For if you want to capitalize on this starting pitching, maybe 2029. You can maybe extend it up to 2029 if you get some good stuff out of like Logan Evans, right? Some of those guys,
Durangelo CJ, or some of those other guys coming up. Yeah, absolutely.
But your window for making the playoffs and making a run deep into the playoffs starts now. The question is, when you look at the competition in the playoffs, again, the American League is a lot weaker than the National League right now. But if you want to win the World Series right now, I'm sorry, a team with this many question marks is not making it to the World Series.
No, I mean, you're 100% right. I mean, and I don't think that's the sad part. All of us keep thinking 54% because, you built a team that's 54%.
You built a team you hope gets 54%, but the question marks might leave you at 49%.
Yeah. 54 is the ceiling.
This team is built like the 01 Mariners. Except the difference between the 01 Mariners and the team we have is that team had nearly 100% of those guys had a career year. If that team on paper was not great, there were some stars, just like this team does, but everybody on that team had a career year.
Yeah,
Paul Abbott was our ace. I mean, let's just state it right there. He's a 20-game winner.
Hold up, Paul Abbott. No, not
I'll
Paul
put it
Abbott.
this way. I keep going back to Kevin Newman and Brendan Rodgers. David Bell was like a 265, 270 hitter with like a 700 OPS, batted seventh or eighth in the lineup every single day, and was a quality, productive third baseman. That's the kind of guys you need at the bottom of your lineup that are just higher quality than the other guy's number 7. Your number 7 just needs to be that much better than the other guy's number 7. Your number 8 needs to be that much better than the other guy's number 8. And when you have that, you can win a lot of games. And you're right. Yeah, the Mariners in 01, pretty much everyone had career years. But the back end of that lineup, when you had Dan Wilson hitting, I think he hit like 270 that year, I think, around. Right? And I think he's a 270 career hitter. Like when you had guys like that at the bottom of your lineup, giving you quality at bats, and extending your lineup where they weren't just give ups, that's why they won a lot of baseball games, in my opinion.
Freddie Garcia. I wanted to make just one small correction. That team was led by Freddie Garcia. And then yeah, he was our ace.
Second would have been Jamie Moyer,
Joel Pinheiro. I can't.
John Halama, Paul Abbott.
Paul Abbott, and then you had
Joel Pinheiro came in at the pennant. He was coming in he came in like he played after the trade deadline. He wasn't there.
He had some weird streak mid-season when he debuted. He had some weird streak where he retired.
It was a scoreless streak.
58 right-handed batters he faced or something.
Yeah, it was a scoreless streak. Yep.
No,
Jim Abbott.
I think there batters he faced. It was something like that. I don't remember what it was, but it was like the first.
But Paul Abbott that year was 17-4. He didn't have another season where he had more than 9 wins. That's just the kind of thing I'm talking about. Is you had guys.
I get confused. Was it him or John Halama that took the bat to the face?
I don't remember that one off the top of my head.
I'm not sure. But I think but like again, just I look at how the teams are constructed. The teams are constructed almost identical. You have a lot of question marks in the field. The difference was the pitching staff for the Mariners is much better off than it was in 01. But
Yeah.
if you look, I mean, no one expected Brett Boone to hit nearly 40 home runs, and the Mariners to have, I think, what was it, 7 All-Stars that year. I mean, you had your, Ichiro again was an up and come was a complete unknown till that.
Yeah.
You had Edgar. Edgar was, we knew what he was. Mike Cameron was an All-Star.
But he was also, I mean, he
did
was.
pick up John Oliver the year before, though.
Yeah,
And John was always a good player, right? He was always kind of a solid player, but then he brought it up a notch. I mean, hell, Carlos Guillen was our shortstop and tore it up. I mean,
John Oliver was a worse player with Seattle than he was, I think, with any other team in his career. Like his time with
Toronto.
Thank you. He was like a 330 hitter, I think, a 320 hitter. When it came to Seattle, I think he was like a 280, 285-ish career hitter with Seattle. He was good. He was solid.
I'll look it up.
But he was not as good as he was with other teams. Or his down years were in Seattle.
Yeah. And who was your left fielder? Was it?
So one year with Toronto.
That year it was Stan Javier and
So here, just to back you up, Ty. In 1993 with Toronto, he was a 7.8 WAR player with a 360. He slashed 363, 473, 599.
What he hit like 20 home runs though.
Walks. 24 home runs. He's never been
he's not a home run hitter.
Over the top power. I think that was his max home runs, 24 home runs. But then for the Mets in what was that? 1998. For the Mets, he had a 7.6 WAR season. Slash 354, 447, 551, 22 bombs. Yeah.
Yep.
His down years were the entirety of playing in Seattle. 3.7 WAR, 5.2, 5.1, 2.7. Highlighted with a 5.2 in 2001. That was his best year, WAR-wise. 302, 401, 472 with 21 bombs. Yeah.
Still a great player, but coming out of 2000, you did not look at him going, oh, we expect him to be 7.5 WAR again, So question, still question marks even in that roster.
Still question marks, and they got high end production from. They got a 5 WAR player, which is pretty. That's pretty good.
But I would say that offense was that lineup day to day was longer than this lineup is. If that makes sense.
Also, second year, that was their second year playing outside of the Kingdom. The first year they had Alex Rodriguez, I believe, and I think they had Ken Griffey Jr.
It was the second year without Ken Griffey, and it was the first year without A-Rod.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, right. But you had guys like Al Martin, Mark McLemore, Stan Javier. The bottom of that offense was higher quality than the bottom of this offense we have right now.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, those were all role players. I mean, but they were. Yeah. And we talked about it on an earlier episode where, like, you talk about the different teams. These super team. We talk about super teams or teams that you create based on roles. Like, hey, we're going to put this person in this role because that is based on the analytics. They play that role to a T. That's where I think Luke Raley is going to be awesome at first base because statistically speaking, he has his best stats when he plays first base. Maybe it's a mindset. Maybe it's a little easier for him to just kind of flow through the defense and then he gets up to hit. But that's where you kind of look at, and that's where the debate goes. Are super teams better than these teams that are built? Hey, I got this guy to fill this role. Maybe a little bit of Moneyball type of thing there.
I have a question for both of you. Right now, who is the, I guess, everyday DH? I know it's going to be between like Solano and stuff, but if we had a right-handed pitcher, who's, as of right now, who is your starting DH?
Against a right-handed pitcher?
Right.
It had to be Solano. I feel like you paid him to come in to play. I mean, until he can't hit right-handed pitching,
yeah,
I think he's your guy.
So to back that question up with another question, if you have a right-handed pitcher, is it worth it, especially at home, and we've seen the splits for at least Luke Raley, is it worth it? Do you think your lineup is better or worse having Rowdy Tellez and Luke Raley in your lineup against a right-handed pitcher? I think so.
I just
I think
don't
having,
see how you make the roster room.
I know. So and
Yeah.
to answer that question is you got to make it work because that is your best lineup against right-handed pitchers, which do like right-handed pitchers dominate the game. More
The
so than
only way you
lefties.
make that roster room happen is if you DFA or somehow get rid of Haniger.
I think that's honestly, that is your answer. Is Haniger? It all revolves around what your decision is with Mitch Haniger. And again, I think it goes back to what I suggested earlier. There's got to be somebody that can take even $2 million off of that. Or let's just say you're trading him for a no-name prospect, and we'll eat every last dollar of it. We'll eat all
At that
15
point, but I think at that point you respect the guy enough for what he's done for your team over the years, and you say, you know what, we don't think you're going to play. I think there's something left in the tank in you.
Yeah.
We need to bring people up. I think we're just going to do a respectful move, and we're just going to let you go. Let you pick who you want, who wants you.
The
at
Bobby
your
Wagner
pay,
situation.
or at the minimum, and you go.
Yeah.
Bingo. And I think it's just a respect deal at that point. Because I think he's a great guy. I just think we got a logjam, and I think there's players that can help us today. And I think Garver's the same way. If Harry Ford's playing like this, I mean, I get it is spring training. Aaron Goldsmith at the best. Do not count these stats. But again, we've got these young up and comers. We need to see what they're doing, and that's the thing with Ben Williamson too. He's 24. We need to know what you're doing, because if we're going to sit you in a logjam to your 28, we're going to get the Shriner effect again, and we can't. We got to avoid that as best as we can, because we have a lot of them in that age group. So it's like we need to start seeing what we have here.
Are you concerned, Kyle, with Harry Ford's inability to show gains in power across Modesto, Everett, and Arkansas?
No, and I guess this is maybe a different aspect of baseball that I look at.
Mm-hmm.
Home runs and these big blasting doubles off the wall, that's sexy, right? But you know what I think is sexy?
No, I should also preface that with his EVs are in the bottom percentiles. They're usually in the 60th percentile, 70th percentiles.
You're looking at the sexy things that I think are way overlooked at, they're way overweighted. Does the guy get on base? Yes or no? I don't care how he does it. Does he get on base? Does he hit with 2 outs? Does he hit well with runners in scoring position? Yes. Make him yes or no questions. I don't need to know his EVs.
When you look at a
BAs
guy's
EDs.
on base percentage,
just give me.
Are you concerned at all that when we look at the pitching environments now, post, like I hate to say it, but post 2020, with the reduction of minor league teams, I think the pitching in Double-A has gotten significantly, what's what I'm looking for, closer to major league ready guys, but not necessarily major league ready guys in Double-A. I think a lot of teams store there just close enough, and maybe they're honing in 1 or 2 things in here. I listen to a lot of other podcasters say that, like, what you want to see out of a guy is you want to see him maintaining that on base percentage through like high A and Double-A, where he's going to be seeing a lot of wild pitches, but then he should be also you should be seeing an increase. You should be seeing a drastic increase in on base percentage at those levels, not just a steady level of on base percentage. And so the question becomes, like, does Harry Ford's, is it easier to sit in Double-A and go, that's definitely a ball because the guy's throwing 100 miles an hour and you don't know where it's going, right? But now he gets to Triple-A and he has to face, a broader spectrum of types of pitchers, right? Maybe you've got a guy like that in Triple-A, but maybe you've also got the grizzled veteran who's fighting for that, that extra roster spot in the majors, right? He's going to see a broader spectrum of pitchers in Triple-A. And so for me, it's one of those things where I look at Harry Ford and I say, he's produced at every level at a pretty slightly above average production at each level. What I want to see him do is make that jump from Double-A to Triple-A, and I don't want to see that the on base percentage just plummet, because now he's not seeing as many pitches that he can just spit on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so I think I think that's where. I mean, you've got two catchers right now that are minus Garver that are hitting really well. I mean, they're showing that they can hit this type of pitching, which I know it's a blend of major leaguers and AAA, AA, single A guys, but I think you'd have to really look and say, well, how has their approach been in these at bats? Do they look like they've got a game plan going in there? Do they look comfortable? And so I mean, so is Harry. I mean, Harry Ford's what, 21, right? So I mean, he's probably more destined to that AA, AAA spot. Blake Hunt, I think, is a little bit older, so he might be, and he's hitting the wall too. So I mean, he's another person that you sit here and go, do you bring your youth up? And
I mean, before Blake Hunt, I'm maybe bringing up Jacob Nottingham first, to be totally honest.
Nottingham does have he at least does have major league experience, and he also played with Rowdy Tellez, if I'm not mistaken.
If I recall, he's not a bad overall hitter.
Yeah, I think
Nottingham. From what I understand, he's supposed to be a really good. He's supposed to be like Rowdy Tellez, and he's a really good locker room
clubhouse
presence.
guy. Yeah,
clubhouse presence.
Nottingham would be a guy I no matter what would love to keep him in the organization.
He's a horrible hitter. Career .5 WAR. Never mind.
But that's but I think we're at a point now where like we're talking about. I've talked about. I think I've talked about this with Gavin more than others, but we talk about like good teams. You're usually hiding one player. I think about like the St. Louis Cardinals back in the day with like David Eckstein.
The Mariners hiding like 4 players right now.
We're hiding 4 or 5 guys. So at this point, like we have our depth. We don't have depth. So at this point, it's like I want to bring somebody in that might give us a spark. And now we're weighing the veteran leadership versus the sparks. Now let's say we're competing right at the deadline. Bring in a Justin Turner. Give you that presence that gets you to the finish line of the regular season. But right now, I would rather give me the spark plug who might, crash towards the end of the season, but that's fine. Hey, you did your part. We're going to we'll set you aside. We're going to bring in the vet and we'll go from there. But like, I just think right now we need to kind of come out with a bang. And if you have some of these young guys that are just kind of sitting there chomping at the bit, you might see this, kind of quick, I would say kind of a quick, results that we're hoping to see with the Mariners as opposed to this kind of slow and steady. Oh, the pitching's going to come through for us. The hitting will show up. It never shows up. I kind of we need to hit the ground running. And I'm just afraid this lineup is just not set to do that today.
I did want to throw a wrench into these plans and kind of switch gears just a little bit before we go into our pitchers, because we do need to at least address the pitchers at some point this episode too. Let's say this season is a complete and utter disaster and we're on pace to win 65 to 70 games. Is it sell season? Is it adios Luis Castillo? Is it adios anybody who's doing good, worth something? Is it adios Rosarena? Are we now stockpiling to move forward in another direction while keeping the 4 pitchers that we're looking to move forward with? If this season is really going that terribly, is it guys that are making way too much money? Mitch Garver, see where he can land. Luis Castillo, Rosarena. Do you guys think that if the season is going that direction, that it is absolutely time to move forward and re-prepare? Because I guess if you do that, you're not too far away to come back next year, as long as you do make good off-season acquisitions, which they've never done. And I don't trust Jerry to go do it again next year. But had I been the GM, I could probably do that with getting rid of Luis Castillo and a couple other guys.
Well, Kyle, really quick, based off that question, I can only come with a few guys that I'd be willing to move. Can you come up with more than just like Luis Castillo, or that would actually have value as well as moving? Like, I can't come up with more than like Luis Castillo and maybe Solano.
Well,
right.
So here's a couple things. So like Luke Raley could go off. Is he worth selling?
And Randy Rosarena. Those are the 3 I came up with. Yeah.
So if I don't think this is a sell team, especially with the pitching have, especially with that young pitching. You have like Ty mentioned, you've got probably a good 3 years window, maybe a 4th year, just depending on options and arbitration and things like that. So in my eyes of selling, it's just shedding the budget. You're shedding the payroll. You're getting rid of Haniger. You're getting rid of Garver. You're getting rid of Castillo and getting whatever you can get out of them. And now you're bringing in the youth, and you're saying, okay, what do I have today? And so that's bringing up Hancock. Maybe you bring in a Logan Evans, and you kind of create that 6-man rotation. You kind of figure out where you're going to feel through that. And then that's where, okay, Ben Williamson, it's a Polanco deal, right? Polanco, you're gone. All right, William or Ben, it's your spot. Do what you want. Cole Young, we're plugging you here. Do what you want. Maybe you look at JP and go, is JP really our future? Do you slide him out and you throw in a Cole Young there? And I think you start seeing how that youth is. I think a Rosarina, I think he's still young, productive. I think relatively cheap, where I don't think you get rid of him. And he is still a little bit of to me, he's got a little bit of a swag to him that you still need to have in that ball club. And so for me, it's your big three. It's going to be Haniger, Garver, and Castillo. Those are the three you just absolutely get rid of because they're covering 3 spots of youth. Now, again, Castillo's going to bring something back for sure. He's still a solid player. Garver and Haniger, they're more just kind of they're money dumps. Polanco, he's not a money dump, but maybe he's having a decent year where you'd say, hey, he can go to somebody and compete and get something for him, right?
So I asked this question on purpose.
It's a great question. No, I really, it's a good one.
I know it's because I'm not for that. I'm with you guys. I asked that because, and to all of our listeners out there, don't freak out if this is not a good year. We still are in a window. We still have great players to maneuver with, and it shouldn't be sell season if we're on pace for that. At least that's my opinion, and now I know that's Kyle's opinion. I think that's Ty's opinion as well. But that is, if this year is a disaster, obviously there's going to be your big 3 that are on the chopping block, and you really do feel out what the market is. If it's a seller's market for pitchers, Luis Castillo, you could potentially sell high if he's doing well, and you could reroute that and find a 5th starter. I think Emerson Hancock being your 5th starter, still gives you a really good staff for the rest of the year.
I want to put another name out there that possibly people aren't thinking of if you're having a down year. Now, I don't like this move at all because I think you don't have a quality everyday backup. You have some hopefuls, but JP Crawford, I think he's due 10 to $11 million in the next 2 years, 3 years each.
And you got a 6-person logjam in the minors for shortstop.
Exactly. Right. So if it's a projected 65, 70 win season and you're just looking to dump, I don't like get rid of the guys. Like I think Luis Castillo has a lot of value on the trade market. I think besides him, the only 2 guys who might have value, but I don't want to get rid of them, would be JP Crawford and Randy Rosarena. Like I don't know that anyone's taking. I don't know that there's any way in hell the Mariners are walking away from Julio Rodriguez. Like that's just never happening.
No, that's not happening. But I think you have to look at too, though. We have the same pitching staff we had last year, and they're not getting worse. Unless a bunch of them fall to a Tommy John or a nagging hammy, those guys are going to carry you to 70+ wins. I mean, that's what they will do.
The way that this season would play out in that scenario would be like kind of, you and I have talked about, Ty and I talked about earlier today. Last year was definitely more of an anomaly than it was the norm as far as the production you got from your starting staff. Having almost all your pitchers go 25 starts plus, besides I think Brian Wu was a little bit less than that. I think he was more like 20. The amount of starts that your starting 5 gave you last year is significant, and it's hard to repeat in 2025. 1990, no problem. Like you're expecting all 5 of your guys to pitch pretty much every last game and pitch through like 3 or 4 games through.
It's closer to 30. Everyone was. I think everyone got at least 30.
Yeah. Brian Wu had 22 starts.
Yeah, there it
22.
is. Okay,
oh wow. Okay, that was all. I thought they were all like 30 to 33, and I thought the 30.
Hancock, Voth, and who else had starts for him? Hancock, Voth, and someone else.
But Johan Diaz.
Yeah, Jonathan Diaz. Yeah.
But my point being is a season like that would bank on some of your starting pitching going down. And as a fan base, you're depleted if Bryce Miller goes down with Tommy John. You're depleted if two of those guys go down with Tommy John, God forbid. Knocking on wood right now. But stuff like that, it's realistic to talk about. I know I'm not really not trying to jinx it, even though this is one of the most jinxed, or I guess the most superstitious games known to man. But it's a real conversation that the production from your starting staff is noticeable, and how much they actually produced for you, and how many starts they actually gave you. So if stuff like
Gavin,
that
fits into the conversation we had earlier about Luis Castillo's pitch count, right? Like, is he potentially what he and I tracked was the number of pitches he's thrown per inning at Cincinnati versus the number he's thrown per inning at Seattle, and it's about a 15% decrease in total number of pitches. Number of pitches thrown per inning, right? And when you look at it over the course of a season, it was around 400 pitches, 500 pitches per season. And you begin to wonder how much of that is like, we want you to elongate your career by throwing less pitches per inning. We were curious about, like, hey, just throw your fastball middle down the middle and trust your defense, right? Because the Mariners, when you look at SIS,
the Mariners figured something out with that, as Ty broke down the numbers. We saw the amount of pitches he threw in the season, broke them down by how many innings he pitched in the season, and it broke down to, what was it, 18 per game when he was with Cincinnati, or sorry, 18 per inning, 18 point something per inning with Cincinnati, and 16 point something per inning for Seattle, which doesn't sound like, you see those two numbers, you're like, that doesn't sound like a significant difference. Well, over the course of a season, 2+ pitches per inning is a big difference. Like you said, 400 plus total pitches, which puts more wear and tear in your arm. With that being said, a lot of those pitches that aren't being thrown, 15%, are changeups. And so how much stress is it actually putting? What's the outcome? Because he was an elite pitcher throwing 30% changeups. He is a good pitcher. On most teams, he's a number 2. And maybe even a few, he's still a number 1 at 15% throwing those changeups. So yeah, Ty, great point, and I'm glad you were able to break down those numbers, because we were all curious on, what does it look like with Luis Castillo?
I wonder if that's an intentional strategy by the Mariners to help him elongate his career.
Yeah,
right.
Because
we can get you to throw 400, 500 less pitches per season. Does that? And he's not throwing 98 and throwing max effort every single fastball. Now he's throwing 94 to 96, and he's still just throwing in middle and trusting his defense, and less pitches per inning. Now maybe he's actually worth the $24 million you're giving him per season over the next 4 seasons, including the options, right?
Yeah,
and maybe you look at trading him as being like, well, we don't want to trade him now.
We know we're going to get, we know we're going to get a 3.5 ERA for the next 4 years if we keep pitching him like this. So you don't get the elite, but you get 4 really good years. And as we noticed last year, I think this really surfaced last year when you had all 5 kind of running on all cylinders, was no one was really going over the 100 pitch mark. Whereas a lot of teams, their ace will go over 100 pitches. They'll stretch guys out. They were cutting guys off at 85 pitches. They were cutting guys off. I think Wu was 80 pitches, and maybe it was because of a pitch count, but that extended to a couple other guys. They really, really take into account the pitch count. And I think that has also led to less arm injuries. It's a correlation that I've seen. You see the health of these pitchers, and you see how many pitches they're going through in a single game, and there's got to be some sort of correlation with that, because not a lot of teams are cutting guys off at 80 pitches when they're cruising. Like, that's non-traditional in baseball.
I forget what it was, but I was having a debate with a guy. I think it might have been on Reddit, and we were talking about whether or not the Mariners had the best rotation. He was like, well, they don't even throw the most because they're just out there for 5 innings and done. And when you looked at the numbers, the Mariners started pitching through the most total innings last year amongst any team starters. So, but for whatever reason, they're throwing less pitches per inning, and I think that has a lot to do with just throw your fastball and middle, or throw your pitches middle, and trust your defense. Don't try to go out there and throw max effort fastball so you get a strikeout. Go out there and throw your fastball middle, so you get an out. And I think that saves guys' arm over the long term, but it also saves their arms in season as well. And that's going back to what Gavin said. I think that's why, knock on wood, we've seen less arm injuries from the starting five.
Yeah, and maybe the decrease in velo isn't actually due to age and inability. It's more due to, hey, if you have to take a few ticks off to throw middle and focus on placement versus velo, they're sacrificing the velo is basically what it comes down to. That could play a factor. Maybe it could be either side, right? Maybe the ticks in velo going down with Luis Castillo are due to age, are due to some sort of inability to not hit 97, 98 like you once did just not too long ago. But yeah, in this way, I now that we're talking about the pitchers, I wanted to segue. Ty, could you bring that document back up?
There we go.
But I think we can. I think
and Blas Castano.
But I think quickly we can go, if we're going through this, this team, we can say, okay, who are your 5 starters? I think we all in agreement who they are. I think that's not even with an argument. Catchers, I mean, really it's Cal, and then, honestly, it's probably Garver, even though there probably could be debate if there's somebody else we'd want to bring up, just dependent on kind of what the mindset was.
If I recall, Kirby's ERA while being caught by Garver, I think it was like 9 or 10 games that Garver caught for him. His ERA was under 2 when Garver caught for him. So there's something between the connection between those two guys that maybe you're. I don't like paying a guy $12 million to catch one guy on your rotation, but
he's there now.
Maybe that's his role,
Yeah, you got to pay him one way or the other. Might as well have him there.
But I will say Austin Voth is actually with Chiba Lot in NPB.
Yeah, he's gone now. Yeah,
he's gone now. So to those out there, watching this, obviously
I'll switch
Austin
this back
Voth's,
over here real fast. And...
No worries. But just wanted to point that out. And obviously Troy Taylor is dealing with some injuries, so we're expecting him to take that spot. But that's another spot. So rounding this off.
To be frank, any of those guys in gray could take that last spot.
Could Hancock be put in there as a long reliever?
We've talked about this multiple times, not on our podcast, just as friends. Emerson Hancock could actually be good out of the pen, I think, and I think the other guys agree as well.
He could be absolute filth out of the pen. That changeup, in my opinion, out of the pen. If you were to let him rear back and throw 94 to 96 with the fastball, and with that changeup and with that arm slot, I think you could have the next airbender, in my opinion. That's just my opinion on Emerson Hancock personally.
And could you potentially get maybe it's a Brandon Morrow scenario, right? He's throwing, what is he traditionally, 94, 96 naturally? What do you say? Comes out of 10?
He was 94, 96, top 98, I believe, out of Georgia when we drafted him in 6th overall. What was that, 2020?
So you make him that long reliever or that short-term reliever. Now he's averaging 98, potentially topping at 99. With that change-up, I mean, you could have a real diamond in the rough there. Who's not even a diamond in the rough? I mean, it's and again, he's kind of been that by just happenstance of who we have as a top 5, rotation, he's kind of became a 4A player, but it's not because of what he does. It's just because of where he's at.
Yeah.
So it's, to me, he's also one of those guys that we need to see more of him at a minimum to maybe spark trade interest. Again, we're not going to sign guys, so we need to use our capital, and what better way to showcase what we've got. And maybe you get a legit. Starting pitching is probably the greatest asset that major league teams have. You just see what you have to get, what you have to give in order to get, and for sometimes not all that great of pitching, you give up a lot for it. So if you have a Hancock who is your spot starter, long-term reliever, and he is shoving, you might be able to get a legit bat out of that come deadline. I mean, and we can go down the list, but who's to say you don't see that and you package a deal with JP Crawford and somebody else? I'm still in love with Xavier Edwards at Miami. Like, let's give you we'll still give you youth, but how do you work a deal to get that guy back? Because they're not going to pay him when it comes down to it. When he gets time to pay the piper, he ain't getting the deal. Go to the Mariners and let's pay him, or let's get him, because I think he is a legit star in the making.
The question I would have, if you wouldn't got Xavier Edwards, I'm assuming you're probably having to give up one of either Cole Young or Emerson Hancock in that deal.
Well, it kind of depends. Who do you think your future is for the next 8 to 10 years? Is it Cole Young or is it Cole Emerson? And if it's Cole Emerson, then you said Edwards, Cole Young. Flip side, you flip it over.
Well, right. And so that begs the question, like, I don't know if you saw the Cole Emerson at bat today he had against German Marquez, but
14 pitches.
My God, dude, that kid's approach to hitting, I've always been higher on Cole Young than I have been on Cole Emerson. It's just sort of a personal opinion. There's nothing really to back it up. But today I got a little bit converted more towards Colt Emerson. That it was foul after foul after foul, and it wasn't just like foul.
His batting average is still this. I'm saying his batting average is still this.
He took two different foul pitches, one just outside the left field pole, and then the very next pitch just foul right outside the right field pole. Like, I think his ceiling is slightly higher than that of Cole Young overall.
But again, we've talked about this. You're talking about projections. He's projected to be better.
There's nothing proven. Yes.
That is where, but again, that's where people get. I think that's where the Mariners at least are getting hurt. Is the projectables. No, if you give me the projectables, I will take the major league projectable or the major leagues, the actuals. Give me the major league actuals over the projectables. By the way, Xavier Edwards is 25. Okay,
yeah. No,
well,
I get that. Flags fly forever. Prospects, you miss on prospects, but flags fly forever, right? I've always been that way at the break. Like, you've got prospects, use them as currency, right? Like, there's nothing proven about prospects at all, ever.
I also think Cole Young would be. He just seems like a guy to me that would be okay shifting over to second base. I don't know. And again, I don't know these guys from Adam. I just see Cole Young as someone that says, I will play second, I will play short, I will play left out if it gets me in the game somehow. With Cole, I just don't know if he's someone that's going to be like, yep, I'll go play whatever, or he's going to be, no, I'm a shortstop.
Yeah, Cole Young is projected to be a future second baseman. That's where the Mariners kind of have him in their organization. And
when was the last time we had a good second baseman? I can't, minus Cano.
Well, and that's the thing. So if you bring in Xavier Edwards, it's a fight between Cole Young and
probably
Xavier
the highest
Edwards.
projected second baseman before that was.
But Xavier Edwards is a shortstop.
He's a shortstop that can also play second base. Am I?
But that's what I'm saying is, like, who's to say? I mean, he can play second, short, and center field. Pretty versatile guy, right? So, I mean, maybe you package a deal with JP, Colt. Maybe there's a Castillo and something like that in the deal. So you got a shortstop now, you have a shortstop in the future, and you got a pitcher for the now. And we get
how soon do they have to pay Sandy?
I think he's already getting paid.
Oh, he is. He already got his extension from him. I thought no one on the roster was like making FU money yet.
No, I think he's the only one that's making money.
Oh, okay. Because I was gonna say, if you could package a trade where you're looking at saying maybe Sandy Alcantara, Xavier Edwards for like Luis Castillo, Colt Emerson, and JP Crawford, it's not FU money. It's 5 years, 56.
Yeah, so he avoided ARB in 2022.
Yeah.
He avoided ARB.
He's 17, 17, 21.
Yeah. So he's definitely getting
not
paid.
That bad. Yeah.
It's not that bad, especially if you find a way to free up more money between Haniger, between a Luis Castillo trade, between a couple other things that you could do to free up that money. Yeah, you're not paying the guy a whole lot, and he is paid through 2025, 2026, and then there's a club option 2027. So
I will
yeah,
say this though, I
17.3,
am always
17.3, and
hesitant on
21.
pitchers from Miami because it is an even easier place to pitch than Seattle. By the numbers, when you look at the actual numbers of xERA from there, like Seattle, it's pitchers do better in Miami than they do in Seattle. So I'm always a little bit hesitant in that regard.
I think if you get into Seattle, like it's not like you're going to Colorado.
Right.
I think the transition isn't terrible. Like I would be hesitant getting a pitcher from Colorado because it's so rocky, pun intended. Because it's so rocky up there. Like ERAs are just absolutely skyrocketing. You don't know. Like Justin Lawrence is a great example. We all know that he is a good pitcher, but his numbers, because he's in Colorado, are just the way they are.
I think he had close to an 8 ERA last year, 7 or 8 ERA. It was pretty bad. But his underlying numbers, his whiff rates,
for Denver,
all his underlying numbers look good.
You have to be a bona fide ground ball pitcher to survive in Colorado.
Honestly, it's either that. It's either that, or you have to be a complete swing and miss. You have to have complete swing and miss, which I think Dollander might actually be one of those guys. Yeah. And Brody Brecht is a good mix of both. He kind of reminds me of what Emerson Hancock should have been. And it's funny because Brody Brecht's younger. But Brody Brecht has swing and miss stuff. But if it's in the zone and you hit it, it's a ground ball because everything's tailing this way. It's all going down. So if you get any sort of contact on it, it's usually going to end up on the ground. It's hard to elevate his pitches. But yeah, I would say if you're getting Sandy Alcantara, I would take the 17.3 million and take it, I guess, less with a grain of salt. More of, I'm okay with somebody coming from Miami to Seattle and trusting that to work versus
how old is he though? I mean,
he's young. I think he's like 26, 27. He
is 29.
So,
okay. Never mind.
That's what 1 year difference in Castillo. So what's the difference at that point? It's $7 million.
Never mind.
It's $7 million, but yet Castillo can pitch in Safeco. So that point, you're not. That's not a trade I'm willing to make because it doesn't help you either by salary.
No, but if that's what it takes to get Xavier Edwards.
Yeah, absolutely. If that's what it takes to get Xavier Edwards.
How else is Miami taking on $22.5 to $24 million of salary?
Okay, that's fair. I mean, I'll give you that.
I mean, in all honesty, they could just take it because how much is on their books?
They could, yeah.
$80 million. Yeah, $68 million. Yeah. To be honest, if they're complaining about taking on $20 plus million, they got other problems.
But they'd be taking on 7 at that point, and then whatever JP had. But again,
it would be the difference of the two. They're taking on actually 7. So going from 68 to 70, math. So 75. Yeah. Wanted to get back to our topic here of these guys. Who fills out the bullpen? Because we know that Jerry's taking 13. If he could take 14, I think he would, but he's taking 13.
I think you take everybody there, and potentially Taylor's not there, and you add in Hancock. I think Hancock could break the roster as your long reliever.
There's a couple of guys I maybe say don't make it just because of options left, and it's probably Bolton. Maybe Thornton's. I think probably still makes a team out of seniority of what he was able to produce last year, but I think maybe Bolton might start the season in Tacoma just because he's got no options left, and so it gives you that flexibility of calling him up later, and then maybe you're bringing up say Hancock or maybe. I mean, I hate to say maybe Blas Castano at this point because he is already on your 40-man roster. But at that point, you got 3 lefties, so I don't know if that's really the case or not. But I say, yeah, definitely Hancock or Taylor interchangeably. Probably Hancock just because he gives you that extra little bit of starting pitcher depth. But for the most part, like it's a pretty set bullpen, I think.
It's a pretty set bullpen, and you got Brash coming back as early as late April, but I think May is the actual correct timetable for him. I think a lot of guys are jumping the gun on saying he'll be back at the end of April. As soon as Brash comes back, yeah, I think Bolton is the low man on the totem pole right then and there. And then, barring anything else, like it's hard for me to justify getting rid of Saucedo or Spire. Spire for sure, because I think he's done a tremendous job. But Saucedo, I guess the lesser of the two lefties that you currently have. He's from Seattle. It's always nice to have a Seattle guy. But at some point it is about business and production. And so if he's not producing, it's still hard for me to justify getting rid of Saucedo if you don't have another left-hander ready to go, which they don't have very many left-handed pitching. They have Brandon Garcia, who I think is your next up left, like that has high-end potential to do well in the big leagues. I honestly think that's your next one.
If you go into opening day with this is your bullpen, the only thing I have a problem with is the lack of flexibility. Is that Taylor/Hancock slot is really the only one who has options left.
Yeah, and that's unlike that is unlike Jerry to not have at least a handful of guys with options. Now, I know there's more options available behind them. So you do want to give the guys with less options the first runner-ups, and obviously guys that have major league experience. But then you look at guys like Casey Legumina, who's kind of busted down the door a little bit this spring, and then has had some quality Paul Sewald comps. You got Bizzardo, who ended the year last year, I think, with some really good numbers. I think it was the last 2 months of the year. He ended up with some really good numbers. Emerson Hancock, who could break the scene in the pen. Will Klein, who we saw the numbers, or we saw his his driveline videos, and he looked like he was really shaping up to be a good pitcher. He hasn't really impressed, or I guess moved the needle for me this early spring. Again, it's early spring, and I'll keep saying that because he could absolutely change it at any point in time. But yeah, Vargas hasn't done anything of note. Danner could be, but he has an option year left. So it's like, okay, does he get it over Bolton? Seth Martinez, Blas Castano. Yeah, it's tough for me to justify one of those option guys getting a spot over one of the non-roster or non-option guys, because you want to at least see where they're at before DFAing them. But I will say, if you do, like Bolton, if you DFA him before the season and he has a bad spring, I don't think anybody's going to take him. And I think I think he is A, replaceable, and B, you'll be able to place him in. There we go. Once an episode, boys. Once an episode. Yeah.
So I just go back and I say, when you look at that list I put out there, Spire, Snyder, Bolton, and Thornton are all out of options.
Yeah.
I don't know how willing you are to only carry one lefty, so I'm not sure that Saucedo's going down anywhere. And Santos and Munoz are both on major league contracts, who you expect them to be productive major leaguers, and I don't know how willing you are to demote either of them. So when you look at it, like, there's really only 2 rotation spots that have flexibility, because Bolton, I think, might be able to clear through waivers if you have to. And then the Taylor/Hancock/ whoever else you're going to run to that spot. So, there is some lack of flexibility issues there that are maybe a little bit concerning.
Yeah. And again, it's unlike Jerry to do that. So, yeah, I'm really curious on how the rest of the spring's going to go. I think that's going to answer some questions. A, injuries, and B, just pure ability on the mound. I know you don't want to take Aaron Goldsmith obviously said it best. I know you don't want to take spring training stats with a little bit of grain of salt, but at some point it's got to be a little bit about competition, right? You got to want the better ERA. You got to want the more strikeouts. You got to want the less walks. And obviously, Fujinami at any point in time could be an absolute problem for the AL West if he figures
whether for us or the teams. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It could be self-inflicted.
I would
for the AL
I
West.
call him a lot like Fernando Rodney. He's a 2-cigarette pitcher where you're gonna have to smoke 2 cigs to get through an appearance of him. Because
Yeah.
he might shut the door down, but he might walk 3 guys and then strike out the other 3. But 2-cigarette pitcher.
He's a 2-cigarette pitcher.
I
That's a new slogan
still
of the
laugh
show.
that we're sitting there. We had a 5-second discussion about the rotation. It's that set in stone, and that just like, oh yeah, forget about it. It's we know what it's going to be. Just yep, there it is. Forget about it.
Okay,
And
besides Emerson Hancock, and you can argue Jonathan Diaz, but I don't think you'd win that argument. Who else is even remotely close? Brandon Garcia, it could go either way. He could be a starter. He could be a reliever.
I still say Michael Morales is probably the first starter we
Yeah.
see up who gets starts.
And at
of any of the
22
guys
years old,
coming up.
At 22 years old and with the 5 in front of him, there's just zero chance he does anything. He's not even giving spring training nods at this level. So, yeah, you really don't have anybody pushing these 5. These are your 5.
Yeah.
These are your 5. And if you wanted a 6-man rotation, it would be Emerson Hancock. That
Well,
would
it
be
is
the
the
argument
best 5 in
again.
baseball.
The argument with this 5 again, we had talked about this a week or 2 ago, is who's starting opening day. That's your argument.
Yeah.
It's not who's going to be in the 5; it's who's actually starting it.
Yep.
And it's probably in a lot of cases probably the quickest debate of a position, probably in at least the AL West, could be bigger. So. And that's a good problem to have, right? Like we have a great problem.
We have
to
a great.
It's just
We have a great problem.
But if someone gets hurt, where do you go next? That's where the sirens go off.
I did want to make one last note. I think I want to give a shout out. Jesse Hahn's actually doing pretty well after not throwing for a couple years. And also Trevor Gott as a Seattle Mariner. Kyle and I talked about this on our episode last week. Trevor Gott as a Mariner was actually not bad. So could him, Jesse Hahn, Fujinami, maybe even Casey Lawrence, who was a good Mariner, 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago before he was injured, any one of them could also put their name down over a Cody Bolton. I think I think to me, Cody Bolton is kind of the lowest man on the totem pole. And so could any of one of them upseat Cody Bolton, and you risk losing Cody Bolton just like you would any of those 4 guys under the NRIs? Yeah, I think so too. I think any one of those guys could come in and do better than Bolton as well, as long as they have a good spring. But wanted to kind of close this thing up with final thoughts. Ty, we'll go ahead and start with you. What are your final thoughts from this 26-man? And I think I kind of already know what they are, but I just wanted to hear you say it.
Yeah, it's the same thing. I've said all offseason, too many question marks on the infield, too many question marks on offense. It's the same thing Kyle says. You're hiding too many players. Good teams hide 1. This team's hiding 4 or 5 plus. The rotation's great. The bullpen's great. But is that going to be able to carry you from 162 to get you in the playoffs? I don't know. We tried it last year and it wasn't enough. We'll see if it is this year.
Kyle, what about you? What are your final thoughts?
I'm curious to see what the team comes out with offensively and who they hold as position players, and if they're putting people in place just because they're putting money towards them, or if they say, we're going to put the best players that we think can help us today and in the future.
Yeah, and I'll close it out with my final thoughts. I'm curious to know what Jerry and company's thoughts are on the production that they're seeing in spring training and how they're able to keep that relative to when they go back to Seattle. I am genuinely curious on how they are creating competition with this many question marks, right? How are they creating competition, and how are they seeing success in that competition, or viewing success in that competition when you know it's not 100% translatable back in Seattle? That's my big question from this is how are you able to define success, and how are you able to punch things forward? Well, guys, that was episode 9. We covered a lot, and we really only covered one subject, but it was a lot that we went in depth on. For Up West Sports, that's Ty. Holy smokes, I'm doing it right. That's Ty. There we go. That's Kyle Knowles. Just remember, life's too short. Gas up your boys.